I think we can start by having all the panelists give a couple of minutes of introduction about who they are and what work they do, and a little bit about how they got to their current job, what drew them there. And so I guess we'll just go in alphabetical order because that's an easy way to do it. So I'll start with Parmvir Bahia, a staff scientist at the University of South Florida. Parmvir, would you like to start?
Of course, thanks for the introduction, Beth. So I began by studying in my undergraduate at the University of Manchester, after which I did a PhD at University College in London, both in pharmacology. My first postdoc was at King's College London, at which point my research interest shifted to something a bit more neuroscience based. And I then started my second postdoc at the University of South Florida. That was about 11 years ago now. And so essentially I fell into my current position, the official title for which is Research Associate, after completing my postdoc position, because USF essentially gave my PI an ultimatum and said, you either promote her or she has to find something else. So yes, and the lab that I work in is interested in how sensory nerves are involved in respiratory disorders such as asthma and persistent cough.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Ileana Cuevas, who's a lab manager at UT Southwestern. Ileana?
Thank you. So yeah, my name is Ileana Cuevas, and I did my PhD. I am from Argentina originally, so I did my PhD in Buenos Aires. And after the PhD, I moved to UCSF to do a postdoc with my husband. And from UCSF, my husband got a position at UT Southwestern. And I moved with him, and in the beginning, I took like a 1 year gap to make sure my kids adapted to the new life. And then I started a position as a lab manager / instructor in the lab of Dr. Diego Castrillon in the Department of Pathology at UT Southwestern.
Thanks so much. And I think Christine Levno may not be here right now. If you are, all right, then we'll move on. Next, we have David Scott, who's a facility director of the Cancer Metabolism Core at SBP, which, as far as I know, is Sanford, Burnham, and Prebys.
That's right, yes. The whole name is Sanford, Burnham, Prebys Medical Discovery Institute, which is an institute with about 700 employees. And we're in the La Jolla part of San Diego. We're just across the street from the Scripps Institute. So there's a lot of research institutes around here. And I'm the director of the Cancer Metabolism Core, which is kind of, it's a bit like a metabolomics core, but it got called Cancer Metabolism for historic reasons. And it's part of the NCI designated cancer center here. So we have about 12 cores at least, which are involved in provide different specialist functions, which is one particular advantage of this institute, in that labs can get a lot of help with doing specialist techniques. And with the size of our institute, we do, although our primary focus is the cancer center here, we do work both for inside and outside people, other people at universities and research institutes here in San Diego, and also local biotech companies. But we also do research for people, different groups around the United States and abroad. So I got to this job, actually I just worked out, I finished my PhD. I did my PhD in Glasgow in Scotland, and I finished 35 years ago. And I've been the core director for the past 5 years. So I'm not going to go through all the steps in my career and intervening process, but when I came to San Diego about 12 years ago, I started developing methods for GCMS, gas chromatography mass spectrometry, which is our main platform we use in the core here, both metabolite quantification and metabolite tracing. So when the previous director left suddenly about 5 years ago, I was asked or pleaded with to take over as the director. And that's the first time it's ever happened in my career that someone's actually asked me to do a job rather than having to go out and search for it. So in a way, like the first speaker, I just fell into this job. So as I say, my path to this job has been rather winding. So I don't know if I'm the best person to ask in terms of how do you go out and search for this job. But I do have a lot of experience working in academic labs, and I'll be happy to answer questions in terms of how this compares to working in an academic lab and its advantages and disadvantages.
Thank you so much. So we'll move to the Q&A portion, and there are two main ways I think to ask questions. One is if you click on the participants button on the bottom of the screen, it opens a window where you should have the option to click raise hand. And if you click raise hand, a little icon will show up next to your name, and I can call on you and you can unmute yourself. Or if you would prefer to just write your questions, you can type the questions in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that as well and ask your questions. So as people are getting their questions ready, I thought I could start with a sort of broad question that could go for all three of you, but your jobs are pretty different. So a lot of the questions I think will end up going to just one of you at a time. But to start somewhere broadly, would you be able to describe maybe some of the best aspects of your jobs, the things you like the most, and some of the aspects that maybe are a little bit less your favorite? And whoever wants to take it first can just go for it.
Okay, I'll go first then. So in this job, it's the good aspects of it, I would say, are that I work with a whole variety. I'm certainly never lacking for variety because I'm always working on different projects. As I say, primarily I work on cancer, but I also work with people who are doing neuroscience and microbiologists, like studying microbiome and bacteria and the metabolites they produce. And I'm always being challenged in that people like to refer to me as the metabolism expert, which makes me uncomfortable because even though I certainly know and have relearned a lot of metabolism in this job, I'm always having to learn new stuff, and there's always even common aspects of metabolism which I really don't know much about, and I have to learn up on it. So the really good aspects of working on a variety of different things. The other side, I would say, is that you're not in control of the preparation of samples altogether yourself, and sometimes the samples we get are not very good, and with increasing experience, you learn that sometimes you just have to tell people your samples were no good, and I'm sorry, I can't get you very good results out of these. And that's certainly when you're starting, it's difficult because you're trying to do your best and you're getting bad results, but you haven't been the one who's been in control all the time. So you're at a bit of a mercy with what people provide you. But on the other hand, there are plenty of people who produce excellent samples, and it's a pleasure to work with them.
I can go next. So essentially, I don't think I realized until very late as an undergraduate that I could do a PhD and have a career as an academic scientist. I think before that I was considering something like pharmacy or working specifically in industry. And so for me, the thing that really appeals about doing science is the bench work. So I love doing the experiments, I love analyzing the data, understanding what my experiments mean. And the longer I stayed within academia, the more I realized that if I became a PI, which is essentially what I'd been told from the outset was this is the career track, this is what you do. I realized that I was not going to be doing that anymore. Essentially, I would be a manager applying for funding and looking after the lab from a kind of more administrative point of view. So for me, the part that I really enjoy about my work is that I get to do the experiments. And although I don't teach, I do get to mentor the grad students in our lab or undergraduate students or volunteers that come through. And I very much enjoy doing that. As for the negatives, I mean, honestly, I'd be hard pushed to think of any other than the fact that I suppose if I were to try and find a similar position elsewhere, it's a very kind of hand-wavy title. So to try and look for an example of what a research associate is, for example, we have a cancer hospital on the same university site. Research associate means something quite different to them than it does to USF. So yeah, I guess it's more to do with what my prospects would be elsewhere.
Thank you.
Okay, I can go next. So the lab manager job, I think also like any other, like one of those research associate jobs, like the definition depends a little bit on your PI or how do you work. In my situation, I am the lab manager, but I also do a lot of research. So I kind of do both things, which I think I like, because for my personality, I really like interacting with people and talking and helping. So I like that I can actually help people. I know that I'm gonna be staying in this lab for as long as I want, which is also nice, rather than you being a postdoc and maybe moving. It's like, you know, that you have that stability in the lab. On the not that good side, I will say that sometimes you have to do maybe things or work on projects that are not your dream projects just because you are the lab manager. So you're supposed to maybe move some projects that people cannot work on because they don't have like the time, or maybe some experiments that do not work for them. So you have to end up doing things that maybe is not what you would love to do at a certain point, but I think it's a balance. You have to do it because it's part of your job. Some other thing that I like about being a lab manager is that at least in where I work, my PI gives us flexibility in terms like I have to go to work every day, of course, but if one day I have like something like come up with my kids, or so he's okay with it. So I think maybe the expectations for a lab manager is not as high as maybe with some other position that that in that case can be different. So it's kind of like a balance in between flexibility versus sometimes not doing what's your passion, but you still like, of course. But overall, I feel like the main thing is like long term. How do you see yourself doing this like for 15, 20 years? I feel like maybe at some point in your career, you might want to do something more exciting. And I think that you can do that. Like, for example, in my case with the instructor position, I could actually apply for another one if I want to, but I don't know how will that work with the lab manager. So I think there's some things that you have to work on, but I think it depends on your relation with your PI in the end.
Thank you so much. So one question that we had submitted earlier was, what could your future look like? And there are sort of two parts that I could see to this: is could you stay in your position? Like, is it stable so that you could stay indefinitely? Some of you've already addressed that. And if you decide somewhere down the road that you want to move on to somewhere else, what would options be for you from these positions? And this is again for all three of you.
I think so. For me, essentially, it's the same as Ileana. So as long as my PI has money, I have a job, and thankfully he's happy enough with me that he doesn't want me to leave anytime soon. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure what it would mean for future positions. My husband is also an academic, and so I don't think this does anything in terms of resolving the two-body problem, unfortunately. But there might be more options in the sense that as someone who is a kind of more general academic, and I have a pretty broad range of skills within physiology, pharmacology, neuroscience, it might be easier for me to pick up something similar if it's available in another group.
Thank you.
So in my case, it depends on really the cancer center funding, which is relatively stable compared to R01 funding, but the cancer center here has been going and been refunded every 5 years since about the 1980s. So within that, we have to earn about half of our budget from fees, which are either charged to PIs here or to outside people, and half of it comes from the Cancer Center grant. So the funding here is relatively stable. So most of the people who are core leaders stay here as long as they want. Some of them move, for instance, people who have been head of proteomics have moved on to industry and are now working for companies that sell LCMS or stuff like that. The head of a microscopy core here used to work for one of the microscope companies. So there could be a bit of back and forth between positions in that way.
So in my case, I think like from lab manager, yeah, I don't think you can kind of change that much if you want to keep doing research, but like they just mentioned, a lot of people go into medical science liaison, or you can go into working for a company to do more like the technical support, or just yeah, keep doing like maybe not lab manager, but you can also be like a research associate. There are like several opportunities in the university to keep to kind of branch or do other things as well. Yeah.
Thank you. This question is, I think, best suited for David. For the positions like core facility director, like you, how would you recommend if people are interested in that? How would you recommend they look for those jobs? Are they generally posted on typical job websites, or is it more of a job like when you email professors to be a postdoc and that kind of informal type of application process?
I think it will depend on how much demand there is for the person to fill that job. if there's somebody available, like when I took over, it obviously wasn't advertised. I was just contacted and I got the job. But I've had for some core directors, and I'm thinking particularly of metabolomics, sort of more metabolomics generally means LCMS-based analysis. And there's quite demand for those kind of people. As I say, they can leave for industry, they either go and work for the manufacturers or they go and work for a drugs company. And I think in that case, those positions could well be advertised by anybody readily available locally who can step into that position. Some cores, for instance, our proteomics core here does have, so as well as the core director, there are also 2 PhD level postdocs who are working in the lab. So those postdocs, I'm not sure if they're, how well they're advertised or whether it's a matter of having the contacts and being through those contacts being able to get a position. I imagine that some of them at least are advertised, but some of them come through personal contact. And in terms of becoming a core director, obviously, if you are working as a postdoc in say a proteomics core, and this just happened with the last director left to go to work in industry, then the postdoc took over the core. So that there you're in a prime spot. And a lot of cores, I think, develop out of people's labs. So the core director has been working on a staff scientist in somebody's lab and then has built up experience and then moves over to being the core director. But I would say, for instance, if I was looking for someone to take over my position, it wouldn't be a complete block to be, I wouldn't necessarily expect somebody to have exactly the right experience because it's my kind of job is very specialized. So to have somebody who has, ideally what I'd want is somebody with some chemistry, biology, computer programming background. So even if you had some sort of mix of that without necessarily knowing exactly the techniques which could be taught, then that would still be a useful set of skills to have to be able to move into this position with a little bit of training.
Thank you. We have one question that I think can go to all 3 of you, which is, do you each in your respective positions participate in applying for funding? Or do you get your own funding? And also, how does that play into your salary? Do you have the ability to apply for funding that can increase your own salary?
So I can answer. I think like I could easily apply for funding, but I think it depends how well funded is the lab where you are working. Like my PI, he's usually very successful with grants and he likes to have small labs. So with maybe middle-aged people that are very productive or kind of they know what they are doing. So we are very efficient. So he doesn't push us to ask for grants, but if we want to, we could do it, but we just don't need to.
Thank you.
Essentially the same, because as a research associate, I have a non-tenure track faculty title at USF. And so I would be entitled to apply for funding, and I know that my PI would be more than happy and very supportive of me to do that if I wanted to. But yeah, as I said earlier, that was one of the things I was trying to avoid. So I'm more than happy to continue on in the lab as it is. And I have friends and colleagues who actually I have several friends who are doing similar jobs to me, and essentially they went on from their postdocs into these kind of senior scientist positions, and they do apply for R01s with their PI's assistants. So there is that possibility. It's just obviously the longer you stay within this, as opposed to being an early career researcher, you know, the goalposts change as to how much effort you have to make in terms of being within those funding brackets in order to get funded.
That makes sense. Thank you.
So for me, as I say, every 5 years, the Cancer Centre has to renew its grant. So last year, I wrote a section of 6 pages or so for my core. This was actually compared to trying to write an R01 grant, which I've done in the past unsuccessfully. The Cancer Centre grant was actually pretty easy to do because you just had to follow a formula, and it was more retrospective rather than producing ideas for new projects. So I've done that, and I've also helped people with program project grants. I've been involved in one program project grant for the past 10 years, going back to before I was core director, and I got a small amount of my salary for that. And that's had within it a metabolomics core, which has basically been me for the past 5 years. So I've done a little bit of that, and I do help PIs here, particularly within the Cancer Centre, write small sections for grants. But compared to sitting down and trying to write a whole R01, this is really pretty easy stuff. And it's, you know, I can produce a couple of paragraphs and they're delighted with it. And that's all I have to do. And that's not anywhere near as stressful as writing a whole research project grant.
Thank you. We have one question. You all have loosely touched on this, but can you be involved in mentorship and outreach in your positions for all 3 of you?
So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the reasons that my PI likes having me around is that he is not so in touch with the lab techniques anymore. And so to have someone who is trained in the actual bench work to teach grad students, I think is of huge importance to him. And for me, while it's not necessarily something I set out to do, as I said, I do enjoy it. I was going to say something else, but I've forgotten already. Was there a second part to the question?
I know, mentorship and outreach.
Yes, the outreach part. So I actually run several outreach projects outside of the lab, and I'm actually on the Science Outreach and Communication Committee for ASBMB, so shameless plug there. In my case, one of the luxuries of having my position is that my PI is very supportive of the outreach work that I do, and he's actually done some of the work with us.
Thank you. Anyone?
In my case, it's the same. Like we have rotation students, and actually, yeah, I'm here because I know, like, I help grad students and serve students during the summer. And outreach, I think it depends on your time limits, because usually the outreach sometimes are very time consuming. But I've done like STEM classes in the ISD school district high schools for girls or things like that. So I think it depends also how many opportunities are in your particular university, but overall, yeah, I think like every PI is supportive with those things as well.
Thank you. David, do you have any thoughts?
Most of the work we do is based on people supplying with samples, and then we're analyzing them. But I do have one or two people who I've trained to use instrumentation with the core, within the core, and we do have seahorse analyzers, which are for measuring oxygen consumption and so on, and mostly I prefer the users to use them themselves, so I do train people on that. So that there's a little bit of that, but it's not a big part of my job.
So if you're a PhD student or postdoc or anywhere in your career and you're thinking, okay, I would like to move towards a job like something these two people are describing, what would you recommend? How should they start? What steps should they take? I know each of you have pretty different
I feel a bit like the
situations.
shrug emoji. It was just kind of, it's like being a Peter Pan postdoc. You just never leave the lab that you started in. So, I mean, the one thing I would say is that in terms of training, you wouldn't necessarily need to have a PhD, I don't think. In my case, I found it helpful, the training that I got. But I have met very, capable and very bright people who, after their undergraduates, just carried on in and essentially got promoted within the labs that they were in, and they write papers, they write grants. So that is one thing I would say is not necessarily a prerequisite to taking on one of these positions.
That's great, thank you. Anyone have thoughts? What someone should do?
So I think like it's always good to connect with different people that have different jobs, because I feel like the more you talk to people about what they do, is like the more you learn. Like usually we try to stay, especially I feel women, maybe because we have kids, and then we tend to stay in the same path, like because, like one thing brings to the other. So sometimes it's more difficult to make like radical changes, because, you feel it's like, oh, like, I will suggest to everyone to just talk to people, see other options, because there's consulting jobs, they're like editing jobs, they're like clinical research jobs. There's so many jobs besides academia, which I think maybe they have more options to for promotions or for different environments, or maybe to work from home, which is something that with this COVID-19 thing, I really wish I could do, work from home more, because we have to end up going to the lab or things like that. So I think, yes, just talk to people and try to look for all the options out there, which are like actually plentiful.
That's true. Thank you.
I would say about trying to get one of the positions like I have, like a core director. I think as a primary goal, it might be a difficult thing to do, because they're not, probably if you added up all the core directors, even from the big medical centers in the big cities, it's a fairly rare position to have. But what I would say instead is, if you're pursuing the kind of, or you're building up the kind of experience in doing, say, analytical techniques like GCMS or LCMS or NMR, bear in mind that these sort of positions do exist. So don't don't count on getting one of these positions. But if while you're looking for jobs in academia or industry, at the same time, keep your eyes open for this sort of position, and you might be lucky like me and just one will pop up and there you are. And I think that they, as I hope I've said, that I think they're very satisfying positions in their ways. So it's a good alternative to either academia or industry.
Thank you. We have someone who's curious about the stress level. How would you estimate that your stress level compares to someone like maybe on the PI track?
I can answer. My husband is a PI here at UT, and I think I'm like a 2 versus a 10. I mean, the PI, like the stress level is like completely different, and I think like, so I think like if your partner, your spouse is a PI, yeah, I really admire those couples with 2 PIs because it's no, nothing like in my, like at least where I work is like, yeah, no, the stress level is very low compared to a PI position for sure. Yes.
Yeah, the one thing for our lab is it definitely goes in waves because we have a lot of in vivo projects. And again, as Ileana was saying earlier, a lot of times as the person who has a broader overview of the lab, you end up stepping in to take over grad student projects, to helping out on big projects that need to be completed within a short deadline. So there are kind of peaks and troughs with regards to the stress, but I would say the same. Yes, my husband is also a PI, and I had to watch him applying for an R01 and a deadline. This was last week, I think, or the week before, and it is incredibly stressful. So for me, it's probably the same, like a 3 versus a 10.
Thank you.
I would just briefly, I would agree that this sort of job is less stressful than being a PI. For going on with the wave theme, we get waves because we never really know what kind of work's going to come on. So we do have busy periods, but we also have periods where there isn't too much going on, and I'm trying to think of method development projects to do. So, but overall, I would say much less stressful than being a PI.
Thank you. That's insightful answers. We have someone who's curious if you ever feel frustrated about not being able to control the direction of the lab, or do you feel like you actually do have a lot of say and freedom since you're the one often doing the hands-on work? Or perhaps does this vary from PI to PI?
So I do feel that because of the fact that they pay your salary, and so you do, I think that's to me, like that's the worst part of the job is, yeah, sometimes you don't have as much freedom, or you can have freedom, but that means that you have to do what you have to do. And on top of that, do maybe what you are interested in doing. And maybe sometimes that's not what your PI is very interested in. So he won't say don't do it, but it won't go anywhere. So I think that's kind of like the worst aspect of this job. Yeah, definitely.
I would agree that it's probably going to depend on the PI, and I suspect, as I said before, if there was a particular project that I had spent maybe 8 years or so working on, and if I'd wanted to carry on with that to try and push in that particular direction, I'm sure my boss would be supportive. But clearly, as the funding comes in for particular types of grants, that money needs to go towards those experiments. And so I found that the experiments that I've been doing recently aren't the ones that I enjoy very much necessarily. So yeah, while there is this I would say there's plenty of independence in terms of how you design your experiments, what you do. If your PI trusts you, you're essentially left to your own devices and reporting back. But yeah, it's entirely possible that your projects will shift. And I think this is something that I found during stints within industry as well. So I did various placements as a student. Essentially, when the funding went away for a project, that's it. Everybody just stopped there and then. And it's like, okay, this is our new baby now. So we're going to start working on this. So it's a bit like that. It's not quite as extreme, but yeah, for sure, you end up doing a lot of what the PI dictates you do.
Thank you.
So in my case, obviously, I'm dependent on the work that comes in from a variety of different labs. So I don't have a lot of control about what I'm working with. And as I said before, I don't necessarily have a lot of control about either how interesting the project is or the quality of the samples, but we do our best with what we're given. In terms of running the lab, this institute here, the core directors are given a lot of freedom to run the core as they wish, so long as they make their budget or get close to bringing in enough money, then we're okay and we can run it pretty much as we wish. But I don't think that's necessarily the case with all cores. A lot of cores are somewhat as extensions of people's labs, and there may be, in most cases, more control from the PI of the lab. So it's something that if you were going to be applying for this sort of job, is to investigate how much freedom you have to run it and whether you want to have that or not, because it works both ways. You have free, as I say, I have freedom to organize things like I want, but on the other hand, sometimes there's less support or direction on what I should be doing. So I have to work it out for myself, which I think overall is good, but sometimes you want to be told more what you want to do, what you're supposed to be doing.
Thank you. Did any of you consider other paths along this way, like leaving academia completely and moving into more industry, or consider staying towards the PI track? Or you've all sort of touched on these thoughts already, but directly, what went into the consideration of, not moving into industry or not marching along the PI track?
So I think for me, I originally expected that I was going to go into industry. And while I didn't mind, I very much enjoyed my experiences doing my placements at Glaxo and Boehringer Ingelheim. It just felt a bit too structured for me and quite hierarchical. So for me, I preferred academia in that sense, although I wasn't crazy about the idea of the kind of the very transient nature of many of the positions. And so for me, I guess once I got the current position that I have, at that point, I pretty much knew that this is essentially what I want to do, because it gives me the flexibility to do more outreach work, which is something that's really important to me, and something that I hope to begin to do professionally as well. So for me, this is a great kind of bridge to be able to fulfill two things at once.
Thank you. Anyone else have thoughts about that decision?
Yeah, in my case, I really I really don't know if I'm gonna be keeping doing this for forever. And like, I think like once my kids finish school, I would try to go into something a little bit maybe more challenging and time demanding. Like my dream is to do non-profits, like helping some kind of non-profit work, which there are not that many opportunities here in Dallas, but there are more and more. So yeah, hopefully, yeah, that will be my dream.
Good, thank you. David, do you have any thoughts about that? Or?
I don't know if I have much to add. I certainly, going back a long time to when I was doing my PhD, I was thinking about going to industry because I thought it would offer a more stable career compared to academia. But then having seen how particularly pharmaceutical research divisions can be closed down with all the consolidation of the pharmaceutical industry that's happened, I came around to the idea that pursuing an academic career would be not any less stable, even though you are at mercy of short-term contracts. At least if you have a contract that's going on for a few years, you know you have a few years anyway, that it's not all going to close down tomorrow. So yes, I was more on an academic track, and then I've drifted into becoming a core manager, but I'm very happy that I've ended up in this position.
Thank you. We have one last question, unless anyone else wants to ask one. How are you able to maximize your? How are you able to maximize your growth, your career growth, and also possibly salary as well? If anyone has any thoughts about that. Or since this is the last question we have, if anyone has other thoughts that you think we should have asked you and you'd love to share with the audience today.
Everybody's waiting for somebody else to go first. Yeah, so I mean, with regards to the salary, I have to say that I haven't fought very hard to get pay rises. So what I've been getting is in line with what USF has been offering with, I guess, inflation, whatever else. Because I have the luxury of my husband having a decent PI salary. So for me, just to be able to continue doing the work that I enjoy works well for me. And as I said, essentially, I'm currently in the process of working out how to make the outreach side of things a career, and that would actually also be non-profit work for me. For me, it's just to be able to have the stability in the lab to carry on doing experiments that I enjoy. I have an amazing group of kind of colleagues and grad students that I work with, and I think that really can't be overstated to have that kind of environment where you get on so well with the people that you're working with that it just makes it a pleasure to work in that lab. So my advice is probably more to do with find a place that's a good fit for you, rather than necessarily think about, because for me, pushing for higher salary and being in toxic conditions does not appeal.
Good points. Thank you.
I'll just have a comment about how you can, what career development you can do in this sort of position. I would say that coming into this position, certainly, as I say, from the variety of projects I work on, it certainly helps to develop me in terms of the techniques and working in different areas of biology. But there are also other aspects which could be applicable if I wanted to move on to doing another kind of job. And those include, I do have to manage my budget a bit and bill people. And I find being a scientist, I find this really an easy part of the job, because you just have to keep track of things and you have to be organized, and you have to keep reminding people to send you a PO and all that sort of stuff. Another part of it is, which I was actually hoping to do more this year, is that because as I say, I work at a small institute and we need to get outside customers. I was planning to do more I was going to go to the ASBMB meeting in San Diego this year and walk around with posters and see if I could rustle up a few new customers. So there's that aspect of it as well, that possibly you need to be a bit of a salesman as well. So there are, it's more than just being a research scientist. This job does need a few extra skills which could be applicable to doing other jobs.
Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, I feel like the salaries can be kind of standard, like in between, like a range for a certain position. What I notice is that sometimes, like maybe certain PIs in general pay a little bit more than others. And that's kind of like, also, if you talk to people, you will also know about that. So there's like by itself certain PIs that tend to, I don't know, there's certain ones that like to pay or more for the same job. But like they said before, it's like you have to be in a place that you spend so many hours and there's so much intellect and that you put into your everyday work, that at the end of the day, you need to be happy with what you do to do the best you can. And you can always talk, because I feel like as scientists, we are not used to ask for a raise or say, oh, you know what I need. And sometimes you just need to go and talk to your PI and say, you know what, I would like to have a raise. I did this and that. And always like the review, the year review is a good option, or like a good moment to go and say, oh, this year it was a great year. We published so many papers. I think I would like to get a raise. And I feel we are not used to that, but once you go and talk, I think overall PIs are human beings, and they know that we have families, and that maybe this is not the best moment to ask for a raise, but yeah, I feel like we need to stand up, and if we do a good job, make sure everybody knows that what we are doing.
That's a very good point. Thank you for sharing that. And we got one more question, which is, David, you started to answer this a little. Do you all go to meetings in your position in non-pandemic years?
Yes. So our standard one is experimental biology, but I also go to the Society for Neuroscience meeting periodically. And for most of my friends and colleagues in this position, it's the same. So we all attend and present at meetings.
No, David, you mentioned that you were planning on it.
Yes, I haven't actually been to any meetings for several years, mainly because doing this sort of work, it's always somebody else's work. But as I said, well, this year though, at the ASMB meeting, there were going to be 3 posters or papers which I was included in on a variety of topics. So that was I thought I've got to go this year, especially as it's just downtown. It would have been just downtown for me. So, and then, as I say, I think I need to go to more meetings in order just to meet people. And we don't need a lot of business to keep us busy, but we need to keep getting new people, new customers, basically, from time to time. So it is important for me to go to meetings. And I know the proteomics people always go to ASNS, the mass spectrometry meeting every year. So I think it's not necessarily encouraged, but it's certainly allowed for you to go to meetings as a co-director.
Thank you.
So yeah, in our lab also, everybody that wants to go to a meeting can go to a meeting. And everybody presented, even technicians that don't have a PhD. My PI also encourages everybody to go to meetings. So yeah, we are very lucky in that regard.
That's great. Well, that's all the questions that we have. So I just would like to thank you all so much for coming. David, Parmvir, Ileana, this was just so informative. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else did as well.